Right, so last night Israel passed the point of no return. Not my words, the words of Netanyahu's chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, as it happens, as an utterly unprovoked attack on Iran was launched in operations designed not only to try and eliminate Iran's nuclear research facilities and derail indirect negotiations concerning nuclear enrichment, but also the targeted assassinations of over 20 key Iranian military figures and nuclear scientists. Many in their homes, the targeting of them with their families in residential areas, meaning this strike also carried the signature, as we've come to know it, of Israeli attacks even in this instance, with the casualties also including innocent women and children. There's no question that Iran will retaliate, and retaliate in a manner we've likely never before seen. Thus far, a drone strike by Iran likely just flagged up potential targets and to see who came to Israel's aid. Anyone referring to it as a strike in and of itself is kidding themselves. But make no mistake about it, regardless of how many media outlets claim this to have been a preemptive strike, this was an unprovoked attack on another sovereign nation, because Netanyahu needs more war to keep himself in power, narrowly dodging his coalition collapsing earlier this week. And Iran, of course, has the right to defend itself. And it will. The fear now is how far this regional war will now escalate across the Middle East, and it was also avoidable if Israel was just made to obey international law and had been taken to task already.
Joined now by Professor Mohammed Marandi from Tehran University. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning. First of all, as I understand it, you're in Tehran. Can you tell us what you saw and heard overnight first?
Yes. In the middle of the night, we woke up to explosions, and we saw that in our neighborhood and other neighborhoods, the Israeli regime used missiles to bomb apartment buildings, and a large number of women and children have been killed. That's not something that you've been pointing out over the last 10 minutes of pro-Israeli propaganda. But without a doubt, people across the country are angered. This was unprovoked. It was an act of aggression. But of course, in the West, when they support a Holocaust in Gaza, obviously, when they support the genocidal strikes in Beirut, when they support daily murders in the West Bank, there's not going to be much sympathy for the women and children lying on the streets in Tehran. But the Iranian response will be devastating, and it will be something that the Israeli regime will regret. And hopefully Trump will be sane enough to stay out of it, because we all know that much of the world's oil and gas comes from the Persian Gulf region. And if the bases, U.S. bases, are in countries on the other side of the Persian Gulf, if the United States attacks Iran, those tiny Arab dictatorships will be complicit. And that would bring about a situation in the oil market that will create a collapse in the global economy, including where you are. So I think you should be praying that Trump is sane enough to stay out of this, but Iran will punish the Israeli regime.
Right, so if anyone can cast an eye over what Israel has done and what it has called down upon itself now, whilst also handing the mainstream media its backside on a plate, as he did just there, you can rest assured Professor Mohammed Marandi at the University of Tehran will do just that, pointing out that Israel again strike residential buildings, areas women and children are in, once again killed as Israel launched attacks to take out key figures in Iran's military and nuclear research program. Marandi hit upon a point not being widely discussed, which is the supply of oil and gas from the Gulf region, which, if matters escalate, will likely be hit hard. And as for Trump being sane enough to stay out of it, well, he's already up to his neck in this, as I'm sure Professor Marandi suspects full well. Israel launched a sprawling and unprecedented wave of airstrikes on Iran under what they're calling Operation Lion's Courage, because, of course, it takes a lion's courage to take out women and children, doesn't it? The targets were not merely symbolic or just military either, but they included civilian infrastructure, nuclear enrichment facilities, residential neighborhoods in Tehran, and high-ranking Iranian officials. Amongst the dead were top Iranian commanders and nuclear scientists, as well as innocent civilians, women and children, caught in the devastating wake of an assault that defies international law, defies sense, defies regional stability and any pretense of moral legitimacy whilst it's at it. This was not a preemptive strike, as many Western headlines are misleadingly claiming, offensively claiming. It was an unprovoked act of aggression by a rogue state, a dangerous regime emboldened by decades of impunity and protected by allies who continue to prioritise their own political convenience over long-term peace in the region. This attack did not occur in a vacuum either. The Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu is in the throes of a bit of a political crisis right now. Netanyahu, you see, has narrowly just survived a coalition collapse just a couple of days ago as the ultra-Orthodox members of his coalition were incensed over the attempted drafting of Haredi Jewry, who were traditionally exempted from national service. Emboldened by now having a 6-month reprieve from facing another similar vote, though, and facing mounting protests at home and international condemnation for the war of starvation in Gaza and global outrage over the annexation of large parts of the West Bank through illegal settlement expansion, Netanyahu is desperate for a distraction again. War, as history too often teaches us, becomes the last refuge of the politically bankrupt. And this bankrupt and corrupt and evil creature, as if he hasn't played this card enough times already, decided that the time was right to go for Iran next. Mossad having been planning this attack reportedly for the last 8 months, and having already bombed 2 other countries in the last week already in Syria and Lebanon, what was one more to Israel at this point? The scale of Israel's operation has been massive. More than 200 Israeli fighter jets were involved, deploying over 330 precision-guided munitions across multiple Iranian cities. Targets included the Natanz and Parchin nuclear facilities, centres that have long been under the scrutiny of the IAEA and the subject of Iran's civilian nuclear energy efforts, not weapons-grade development at all. Other bombed locations included the General Armed Forces headquarters in Tehran, the Mahalati complex, and numerous residential and academic sites. The strike also carried a terrifying level of coordination. Amongst the dead were Major General Hossein Salami, Commander-in-Chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, Mohammad Bagheri, Iran's Chief of Staff, and General Gholam Ali Rashid of the Qatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters. On the scientific front, assassinated figures included Fareydun Abbasi, the former chief of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, Mohammad Mehdi Taranchi, head of Islamic Azad University, and multiple senior nuclear scientists like Ahmadreza Zolfagari, Amr Hossein Faki, and Matali Blizaleh. More than 20 high-ranking Iranian figures have been killed in the overnight strikes. Killed in their homes, killed in their offices, not on any battlefield. No distinction made between them and the loved ones they might have been in the company of. Israel, in targeting urban population centres and nuclear and civilian infrastructure, has violated international humanitarian law again, and the UN Charter's prohibition against the use of force against another sovereign nation as well now. Iran notably had not attacked Israel prior to this operation, nor had it retaliated actually for Israel's last strike on Iranian soil last October, Iran having kept their True Promise 3 retaliation on hold for all of this time. Yet headlines in the West still euphemistically describe this action by Israel as preemptive. It was never anything of the sort. So why now? Well, the answer lies partly in Iranian nuclear diplomacy, the indirect talks with the US causing fear in Israel that Iran would be permitted to enrich uranium to some degree. Israel paranoid about Iran enriching uranium for weapons, of which there has never been any credible evidence, but in Israel's own domestic and regional failures all the more. Netanyahu's fragile grip on power had been slipping as that ultra-Orthodox coalition partner threatening to walk away earlier this week went to prove. The Israeli economy is reeling under the cost of the Gaza campaign. Public dissent is rising over the fact that hostages are not being prioritised and rescuing them. And the world's patience is thinning, though not nearly enough at governmental or organisational level. A foreign enemy provides the perfect narrative for Israel, therefore. Iran is Netanyahu's perennial boogeyman. He has been warning of imminent Iranian nuclear threats for over 30 years. His infamous 2012 cartoon bomb at the UN was nothing more than political theatre. But what better way to revive that narrative than to fabricate a security crisis that justifies state violence and distracts from all that domestic collapse going on? Although the Trump administration quickly claimed the strike was unilateral, it was Israel only, nothing to do with us, Gov. Evidence suggests coordination with key Israeli allies anyway. They knew it was coming. The US evacuated West Asian military personnel ahead of these strikes going down. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz publicly admitted this morning he was briefed in advance by Israel. Reports also suggest that US and British warplanes were engaged in downing retaliatory Iranian drones aimed at Israel. Even Jordan, who always claimed neutrality, allowed Israeli jets to traverse their airspace and shot down drones headed towards Israel from Iran, risking blowback from themselves and further regional instability, as well as risking its own citizens with falling debris. Donald Trump, meanwhile, reportedly gave his blessing to the attack in a conversation with Israeli officials, despite all the public denials. His comments afterwards were tone-deaf and incendiary and typical of the orange man baby. Iran must make a deal before there is nothing left, he said, in reference to the nuclear talks now that are indefinitely suspended. Well, what is the point of having them within an administration like his now if that's going to be his attitude? Iran has obviously vowed to respond with force, as Professor Marandi said. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei declared that Israel has prepared a bitter and painful fate for itself and its leaders, and emphasised that the entire IRGC structure remains fully operational and ready for retaliation. Iran's elite military has reportedly been developing advanced missile technologies to intensify the impact of any counterstrike. It's a sort of narrative we've often heard from Iran but not seen. Yet that could now change given Israel's level of escalation. More ominously, Ansar Allah, the Houthi movement in Yemen, have warned that further Israeli or US aggression risks a regional war, one that could pull in the likes of Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and the other Gulf states, risking that global oil and gas trade that was mentioned a little bit earlier. A fleet of drones launched by Iran after the bombing was not significant in its destructive capacity or in numbers, despite some reports saying 100 drones or 800 drones have been sent. It was, in the view of other sources, just a few dozen. It was providing Iran with potentially valuable information. But Israel needn't kid themselves this was any kind of retaliation. Western interception efforts exposed which nations were prepared to defend Israel militarily. Chief amongst them, it turned out to be the US, UK and Jordan. As a result, US military installations across Iraq, Syria and the Gulf are now going to be vulnerable, despite US protestations that Israel acted alone. Here's a map published by Al Jazeera to illustrate the many American bases in range of Iranian retaliatory strikes, creating a powder keg scenario in an already volatile region. The UN Security Council has been called on to hold an emergency meeting by Iran now. Russia and China condemned the attacks as a flagrant violation of international law. Even European allies have expressed shock, though most stopped short of imposing sanctions. The world watched in horror, but few seem prepared to intervene even now against Israel with any meaningful action. This is not just another skirmish in the Middle East that we hear so many stories about. It's a historical turning point that we're now bearing witness to. Israel's gamble in murdering scientists, targeting civilian infrastructure and destabilising diplomacy and disrupting nuclear talks. It's a direct attack on the foundations of international order. Its leaders claim self-defence, as they always do, but the world sees the truth. This was a war of choice, not necessity. This is Netanyahu in trouble again, thinking, if I might paraphrase a famous line from Jaws, we're going to need a bigger war. Well, now he's got one. Iran's nuclear program has remained peaceful for decades under IAEA inspection, though a recent ruling against them that they'd breached the non-proliferation treaty had them incensed, and in part Israel would have used this as justification to act. But Iran has never developed nuclear weapons. As a signatory to the non-proliferation treaty, it is legally entitled to enrich uranium for civilian purposes, which is all it had, and was working on energy and had made several recent breakthroughs in nuclear medicine. And a religious fatwa is in place banning their development as well, which, as a theocracy, as Iran is, carries a lot of weight. Israel, on the other hand, remains outside the NPT, is widely believed to possess over 90 nuclear warheads, and refuses international inspections of its arsenal, which would of course confirm its existence, something a recent Iranian intelligence operation is said to now be in possession of evidence for. So the hypocrisy is absolutely staggering. The dust is not getting time to settle in Tehran, though. As I'm writing this, Israel have launched yet more attacks on Iran, and this is going to be a massive global issue for some time to come. So stick with this channel to keep updated with it without the spin being laid on thick for Israel, as we know much of the mainstream media in the West is going to be doing. The world has to reckon with this moment now. There's no more time for cynical spin, no more patience for it, frankly, because Israel is increasingly becoming a danger to us all. Netanyahu's gamble is not just endangering Israelis and Iranians, it is dragging the entire world towards catastrophe. If this becomes a long war, as Operation Lion's Courage promises, it will not be confined to maps and militaries in the Middle East. It will be measured in displaced families, bombed hospitals and shattered diplomacy, all of which have knock-on effects to all of us around the rest of the world as well. Condemnation of Israel must be matched with consequences for them, and we need to be demanding that now more than ever. The United Nations, the European Union, the African Union, every sovereign state must demand a full investigation into what the hell Israel is doing here. Civil societies must raise their voices. People must protest, educate and organise. We've got to demand sanctions on Israel. We've got to embrace BDS on Israel. The lie of Israeli impunity must be shattered. That impunity must end. It's time they face the consequences of their actions for once. Because this is not just about Iran. It's about a dangerous precedent they're setting here, where a nuclear-armed state, as Israel is widely believed to be, can assassinate, bomb and provoke with no accountability, simply to rescue a faltering Prime Minister's fortunes, and it's the victim getting the blame for it. Because no amount of death and destruction is too much for this truly evil man. In the end, history will not remember Netanyahu's theatrics at the UN or his breathless declarations of existential threat from Iran. It'll remember what he's done, and the damage left behind, and who let him get away with it, which is already on a horrifying scale, and he's still not done yet. For more on the materials Iran acquired due to their spy operations in Israel, successful as they were, check out this video recommendation here for all the details of that as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, sort of spreading the word and helping support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.